is finding folks who are willing to donate aspects of their land and be ahead of the curve to be out there trying to organize them with a social vision and a mission.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to the Struggle Video News. This week, an Israeli court acquitted a policeman who shot to death Iyad al-Hallaq in 2020. Hallaq was a 32-year-old autistic man who perhaps did not stop at a checkpoint. A soldier challenged him. He fled. He was chased down by police into a garbage shed, wounded, and then shot to death. He was unarmed. This week, a video was released showing Hallaq running.
هذه المشاهد للشاب إياد الحلاق رحمه الله تنشر للمرة الأولى ويمكن أن تبين محاولته الهروب من أفراد حرس الحدود.
It's pretty clear that al-Hallaq had nothing on him. He was running for his life. The name of the policeman who shot him was never released, outrageously. Worse, as we've told you in the past, while he was on trial, this policeman was promoted. He's now a commander. The religious Zionist minister of national security was outside the courtroom loudly shouting with a number of others. Al-Hallaq's mother came over to him and there was an angry interchange. The security minister yelled, "Get out of here, you are a terrorist," to al-Hallaq's mother. In the attack on the Jenin refugee camp, Jenin mayor Nidal al-Obaidi said around 4,000 Palestinians, about a third of the camp, fled and went to relatives or to shelters. Hundreds were injured, scores were abducted, and 12 killed. One building that was attacked was the Jenin Freedom Theater. A hole was blown in its entrance and the street in front of it was plowed up, and the building was used for a while for interrogations. This is a photo of Victoria Amalina, an author who was killed in a Russian missile strike on a restaurant in Kramatorsk that killed 13 people. She died on the 1st of July, which is the birthday of another writer, Vladimir Vakulenko, who was killed 1 year ago by the Russian military, and whose body she was looking for several months before it was identified in a mass grave near the Kharkiv region in the city of Izium. She was able to recover his last diaries, which were buried under a tree in his parents' garden. She published those diaries this June. Andrei Kurkov, a Ukrainian author, did a moving tribute to her on Democracy Now! On July 6th. Well worth viewing. It's been widely reported that Russian journalist Elena Milishina and lawyer Alexander Nemov were brutally beaten in a Russian-occupied Chechnya on their way to a trial. Michelina was doused in green dye. Some St. Petersburg University graduates bravely organized an action in favor of Elena Michelina during their graduation ceremony. Students unfurled a banner with a photo of the beaten journalist and the caption, "The Face of Russian Journalism." According to Novaya Gazeta, the action lasted 25 minutes, after which it had to be stopped because the police had been called. This was not the only green dye attack this week. Lawyer Yelena Ponomareva was supposedly under government protection, but was doused with the antiseptic green dye in Moscow. You recall Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny and Nobel Peace Prize winning journalist Dmitry Muratov have both been subject to stain attacks. This technique is the emblem of Putin's fascism and mimics Mussolini's thugs who routinely engaged in rituals of humiliation. What you see next is amazing. Survivors of 3 platoons of Russian invaders of Ukraine speak out openly on the internet and complain about their superiors. It took years in Vietnam before angry U.S. troops were willing to risk retaliation by officers and made similar statements.
Здравствуйте. Хотелось бы обратиться к министру обороны Российской Федерации Сергею Кузубецовичу Шойгу. Недавно мы с роты Z записывали видео с просьбой помочь нам. Ввиду того, что некоторые обещания свои Министерство обороны не выполняет, и мы находимся в очень трудной ситуации. После этого видео нас начали закидывать самые страшные штурма и точки, которые только могли бы быть.
Вот не так давно мы пришли опять со штурма, чтобы вы понимали, вот эти 6 человек, которые здесь перед вами стоят, это остаток от 3 взводов. Больше нет. Вот мы пришли со штурмом, у нас спросили, а что, вы еще живые, что ли? Ну, если живые, ребят, идите опять на штурм. Это как понимать? Командиры бросают вперед, помощи никакой, вооружения никакого, перекрестный огонь, свои и чужие.
Хотел бы понять
физически не готовы.
Почему, например, бойцы Ахмата, так называемые кадыровцы, приезжают на позиции, не работая, просто снимают видео о том, какие они классные солдаты и крутые ребята.
Ходят вальяжно.
Да, своими видео. За них мы уже прозвали их войсками. А они еще своими видео просто палят наши позиции. После них по нам ебашат просто как ебанутые. Мы с головы поднять не можем. Но самое главное, мы-то мрем под этим огнем. А они уже сидят себе дома и получают медальки на грудь.
Медальки вешают и пьют чаек.
Нет, вопрос, неужели
Неужели, да, они более россияне, чем мы?
Неужели, да, они больше русские солдаты, чем мы такие же солдаты, мы сюда
Вы
пришли.
просто
бросили
на эту
помощь,
войну.
потому что РУЗ пришли добровольно, нас сюда
Прекратить
никто не
вот
вызывал,
это
ничего, хотели отдать долг родине.
беспредел.
Ну, кошмар.
Когда
Все
прекратится
ваши
беспредел
слова
вот это?
по итогу
Пока.
оказались вообще ничем. Все, что осталось.
Наверное, пока люди кончатся. Когда люди
Неизвестно,
кончатся,
что
Или пока действительно люди не закончатся, вы так и будете кидать туда-сюда.
Послушайте
Сколько
нас,
можно?
послушайте вообще нас. У нас есть дети, за которых мы тоже переживаем, за которых
мы
за нас
хотели.
переживаем. Но вы из нас
Сделали
сделали
мы
мясо.
себя. Мы не мясо, мы люди все-таки. Живые. Прекратите беспредел.
Before we go to the remarks, the concluding remarks of Kali Akuno in his Gandhi Peace Award speech, we want to give a save the date notice. Palestinian activist and director of the Palestinian Museum of Natural History in Jenin, Mazen Kumsia, will be on a tour in the Northeast U.S. in August. He'll be in Connecticut on the 8th and 9th, so mark your calendars. More details forthcoming. Now, more of Kale Akuno and his ideas about eco-socialism and the solidarity economy.
Come with, if these are, if the captains of industry are supposed to save us, right, which is what the neoliberal order of the world basically, purports to us, like we should just go along and let them do all the planning and thinking. Well, if that's the case, there's no future for us. So we got to make that future ourselves. Right? And that is the dialogue. That's why this dialogue and this planning is so critical and essential to really moving in a direction. And there's a certain baseline of skills that we need to have in our communities, right? Hard skills, plumbing, right? Woodwork, craft work, things that appear to be old. A lot of those things are going to be the skills that we're going to need in the future. And I'm not saying something like fictitious. I want y'all to understand, we live in a profound period of, just unsteady reality. What do I mean by that? Roughly, probably 1/4 of the countries on this planet right now are essentially stateless. They have no functioning government. Think about that. They have no functioning government. Other societies are in the midst of basically total collapse. Some of them very, very scary. One of them, I would say, look at what's going on in Pakistan right now. How unstable it is rapidly becoming. Do recognize Pakistan is a nuclear power. That means if it kind of completely falls apart and collapses, those nuclear weapons could wind up being on a bunch of markets that anybody could use. A similar dynamic, I would argue for a different degree, is going on in Russia, right? So let's say Russia becomes a failed state. Not that it's a thriving one now, but let's say it becomes a failed state. What happens to that nuclear stockpile? I'm bringing this back to the award because it started in part around nuclear proliferation, right? And it may appear on a certain level that threat is off the horizon. I would argue with everybody here, it's not, right? That is very much back on the horizon and is being pushed because there's another part of this, we really got to pay attention to, is this big thrust that the United States government, both parties, are pushing towards aggravation of war with China, right? And a new program of encirclement around China. They're not just going to sit back and kind of take that, willingly. And both of them have interests, which I would argue are against the overall interests of humanity, more or less to serving their own interests. So how do we interject and move, as people who are not part of either one of these nation-state apparatus to ensure that there's a lasting peace? We got to get much more organized to be able to exert pressure and influence when and where we can and get prepared for the future. So we got a lot of work to do. The good thing is in the periods of uncertainty such as this, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. So don't walk away here thinking anything is gloom and doom. They are very unsure. I'm saying these are like the ruling class factions of the planet. They are very unsure about what to do right now, right? All they have is a bunch of short-term fixes. So the more we get coordinated, united, we have much more of an opportunity to actually create what we want than we could possibly imagine, right? So one of the biggest things is just the limitations in our mind. And I just want you to remember, right? Profound, quick change is possible. You witnessed it. That's just two examples I could cite. There are more that happened during that period of 2020, 2021 that you can point to around in so many fundamental ways the world changed. And it can change in an intentional way. That's the critical piece. Right, so like the great was it sick out or the Great Resignation. Imagine if we organized that and it wasn't just spontaneous. Think about how much leverage and power we would have, right? And so what is that? If we know what's happening, right? What is stopping us from getting ahead of it and start organizing? So like all my trade union comrades out there, there should be some serious conversation in each of your trade unions, well, how do we actually build upon this momentum, right? What type of education work what type of actual contact and organizing work is necessary to be out there. And part of this, folks need to think within that sector, how do you think about your survival, you know, as an organized unit in the face of declining membership over the last 50 years? This is a profound opportunity to expand the base of union organizing and to make it a serious political force in the United States and globally once again. But it just taking a shift in imagination and then being able to engage in a little risk taking, right, to try to go get out there, talk to people and start getting them organized to meet their collective interests. We can do it. It's going to take some hard work. It's going to take some new imagination, but it can be possible. It is possible. We just need to make it happen. So I'll end there and open up for questions. Yes. Well, I mean,
Holly, can you hear me? We couldn't hear the question. Would you be able to
You're
repeat
not
it?
going to be able to hear the question, so if
I'll
you
try to
could,
repeat them.
yeah, summarize them,
Yeah.
right?
So if I can, in summary, the question was about land being in Connecticut being so expensive, and how, in our case, will we able to acquire land? How are we financing it? In essence, right? So part of to you know, just be clear and about this particular piece. There's the history of Mississippi, right, relative to Black people, which is one of the core reasons why myself and others came there to do the type of organizing we're doing. But there was also the factor of choosing it in part as one of the criteria, because there were other things that we were looking at. The organization was looking at it just, you know, about 15 years ago. And one of the pieces that we looked at was where could we afford land? Right? That was already a consideration. Like, given that we didn't have deep pockets and likely weren't going to have deep pockets anytime in the future, where could we afford it? And Mississippi was one of those places. And what we did, you know, we started a fund, small internal fund, in 2001, right, within the organization I used to belong to, the Malcolm X grassroots movement, that was specifically aimed towards buying land. Now, we didn't buy any direct land with any of those resources until 2013. So you're talking about a 12-year of folks, myself and others included, putting in, you know, basically like a dues, self-paying kind of dues, to be able to execute something like that over a period of time. So there's, again, this is this level of thinking ahead and trying to plan that we have to be involved with, and not just, you know, succumbing to kind of the urge of immediate gratification. Because, you know, we need to be recognized and be cognizant of the fact that so much of what, for me, that I'm doing, I'm very clear, I'm not going to live to reap the full benefits of what I'm doing, nor am I planning to, right? This is for my children and their grandchildren and folks in the community who I will never know and never meet. That's what this ultimately is for, right? And so planning ahead to try to meet certain basic fundamental needs is how we've done that. And then other than that, man, we've done almost everything creative you can think of, from, you know, the bake sale to rap concerts to writing grants. I mean, we don't leave no stone unturned to trying to, you know, make ends meet. Now, we've also, you know, through our organizing work, particularly in a couple of fields like in arts and culture, entertainment, we've also been able to recruit a number of different folks who have some resources and be able to be like, look, this should be a priority. Are you willing to, you know, make an investment here in the form of a grant, right? So it's not like personally owned. And we've been able to get some folks to do that. So, I mean, you have to be creative. Part of the thing that I think for a place like Connecticut, it's something which, you know, is beginning to be tried or is implemented the last couple of years in Vermont, is finding folks who are willing to like donate aspects of their land and be ahead of the curve to be out there trying to organize them with a social vision and a mission to be able to kind of absorb some of those particular things. So that, to me, I think is perhaps one of the most viable routes. And you're going to have to do some things like that to counter some of the dynamics of capital. Because unfortunately, you know, this New England area, the capital is one of the most precious real estate areas that exist on the planet, right? In part, particularly y'all are nestled between Boston and New York, right? And New York being one of the capital outlays, the empires of the planet, you get all this pressure and all this money that floats around from folks using this as kind of a backdoor market and relief for summer homes or second, third homes. Then you got you know, you got the university here. So all these things exert a certain type of pressure, which is going to take a tremendous amount of organizing to get people to believe in a broader social vision. But you have to have that social vision with some long-term planning and patience, I think, to be able to execute. Can't hear you, Dan. You're on mute. There
Sure.
You go.
Can you hear me? Okay. There's one message from the Hall Williams family. They say, "Hi, Dad." More importantly, there's additionally, there's a question from William Hart. What would be the first few items to do in order to approach my community about community gardening?
The first thing I would recommend from my experience and our kind of collective experience is first and foremost, do a survey of what actually exists in your community already. I would wager that there are projects that are already underway. Some of which are public, some of which are not. You know, and just really do some patient digging to kind of ascertain what exists. Then the second thing is you got to try to build relationships with those who are doing that work to ascertain kind of what gaps and what resources they may need to grow, develop, and expand. And then what areas are they covering, what areas are not covering. Then the third thing is from that, right, now what happens over time is then you kind of figure out what we would call kind of a gap analysis to figure out like, well, what now needs to be built that isn't built that would add some more capacity to what exists in our community and to be able to fulfill broader needs than what is already being produced. And then that has to be coordinated in some planned fashion. And there's two levels, because a lot of folks, you know, produce primarily for their own consumption and then that of whom they know. And some of that we don't want to, I would argue, we don't want to alter and shift. So it's in part convincing those who are engaged in that type of production to either lend like knowledge and expertise of how they're doing what they're doing, to be in relationship with others, to expand upon that, which doesn't necessarily require them to change their productive capacity. But you do want to encourage, at certain point, can you lend more capacity for folks to do it and grow and expand? And would you be willing to do more growing yourself, right? To lend to this particular network? Because there is a dynamic we have to be mindful of. It's not just more folks being involved in these activities. That is a requirement. But there also is a level of just productive efficiency that we need to get to, right? And to be able to meet people's needs and take them out of these kind of market relationships of folks having to be dependent upon going to a grocery store, but you're asking them folks to be dependent upon their relationship with each other to meet their needs. And there's a trust building factor and time that goes into that. And there's a knowledge factor, right? Because you can have all the great intention you want, but if folks don't know how to grow food, they don't know how to grow food. And so there's a knowledge that has to be acquired on how to do that and how to do it well. And so this is don't look at it as an immediate thing. This is something that you're gonna have to work yourself towards. We're still working our way towards, you know, a level of food security in Jackson, and we still have a long way to go in that regard. But those are some of the immediate steps that we would recommend, you know, based on our thing. Just don't expect, none of us live in an absolute desert where nothing is happening. We just may not know about it. And so the critical thing is to learn about it, to be able to learn who and what is actually in our communities. And typically there's a lot more going on than we suspected.
Okay, we have time for just a question or two more. We have a lot of booths for people to take literature and look at things, a lot of food that won't eat itself. So another question from the audience.
Let me say this very clearly. We are trying to get to where you're going, right? Come from a very similar tradition. And just speaking for myself, it was around the inadequacies of the left, how out of place the left was after September 11th, that to me gradually was like, we're pushing nationally when we don't have the base to move anything nationally. So I'm not one who's just into small, isolated projects for small, isolated projects. Not my point, right? Like the small is beautiful is a real thing, but I can tell you from like our experience in Jackson, right now, the state government is basically removing, home rule from the city of Jackson. And they can do that because we're fundamentally isolated. So being isolated only enables you to get crushed if you're not very clear about the need for a statewide and a nationwide and an international movement. So we haven't forgotten that, but we're not abandoning that in any form or fashion. But it's just trying to say like the, with the Black Liberation Movement, we got devastated in the 70s and 80s. We still haven't fully recovered from that. Right. And then we had, chemical and biological warfare perpetrated on the community to a great extent, basically from the 80s through the 90s. Right. Victim of that myself, father being a crack addict, right. And being taken out from that. So I'm not speaking anecdotally, I'm speaking practically. That just destroyed the organized bases and the institutions that we had in the Black community.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for the Struggle Video News.